Hi, I'm Patti Zucca, and I'm here at the Ross Beitzel Gallery at Rowan College with my dear friend, Doris Nogueira-Rogers. And we're going to do a walk and a talk through her exhibit, 50 Years of Making Art. Doris, I gotta say, I am just loving this show. It's like taking a trip through your lifetime journey of art making.
What I try to do with this collection of works was really bring as much as I could into one space that could show, my exploration of techniques and mediums, and I know that the work changes, but it's 50 years, it's going to happen. Also, with that in mind, I know I'm a very eclectic artist, but I think, I still love, nature and color and all that.
Doris, I can't help but notice recurring motifs, things like leaves and pods and circles. What's up with that?
Well, that is really, it has such a strong presence in my work, and also, even when I'm not talking about, nature per se, it just shows up. For instance, the work, this installation, Life, which is really about life. If you noticed, it has, the chairs and all that, but one chair is upside down, which is really a metaphor for what life is. But the visual elements, it comes out very nature-like. That's my voice. That's how I work.
So Doris, let's start with your inspiration. Where do you get your spark?
Well, for that I have to say, you really have to go back, to my childhood. And although I was raised, in Rio, between the ocean and the beautiful Mata Atlântica, the Atlantic forest, it's amazing. But I think all the time in summers I spent with my, over my grandparents' house in Petropolis, I was just surrounded by such nature. It was like waterfalls and eucalyptus, forests, and it was all around. And my grandmother was an amazing gardener. So I was really raised, with so much green from ferns and anthuriums and, dahlias and all that, and roses. So I was always absolutely attracted, and I felt great amongst that kind of environment. And that really, I think that's where everything started until I came upon, more serious focus, like the destruction of the Amazon, or the mining and the logging, illegal logging. That's what took me to other, parts of my art, if you wish,
So Doris, picking up on that idea of activism finding its way into your work, let's talk a little bit about Rio Bonita from 2016.
Well, this was a series of works I did, actually end up being like a solo exhibition. And it really was a response to an environmental tragedy, a horrible thing that happened in Brazil when iron mining, the reservoirs, bursted, the dams bursted, and really came like cleaning out the whole basin of Rio Bonito, the Bonito River. So I really took that, and the lines that you see here are actually, the mapping of the basin of that Rio, of that river, and including these repeated lines, it's the same thing. And I really try to use the colors of the iron oxide, that really comes down flushing all the towns along, the basin. And here you can also notice, I still use a little bit of my elements, leaves and the swirly bud kind of lines, but that's what this work is all about.
Wow. And there are more pieces in the series. Let's take a look at that.
Yes, I do have one more piece that it's very relevant to the series. We can take a look.
Let's take a look.
So, Patti, for instance, I have, as part of that series, there's a follow-up piece which was the houses, tumbling down. I did this piece, the houses tumbling down. And then following that, that's when I created, this next piece, which is really, in a way, our hope of rebirth. So if you see, everything is still, in those, using the iron colors and all that, but there is, a little something under the earth, and you will, be born again. But we have been told it would take 100 years to happen. It's another example of works. There are more political, or social political content. It's this one. It's a piece that I created by invitation to participate in an exhibition that was for Latin American artists, and it had to do with your. It was called papeles, like your documents, and you had to express what it feels, as an immigrant. How does one feel? And then that was my take. I am a Brazilian American person, but I used, I did the printmaking in the back with the pledge of the allegiance to the flag, but then on top, I used, these are really like folkloric kind of quilt making that you find in Brazil, and I actually printed on this material and made the little circles. They are called fuxicos with the Brazilian colors. And in a way, it was to say, where does your heart lie? You love both places, no? Yeah. And that's the idea. For another exhibition, I created this other piece, which really they were talking about liberty, what was to have liberty. And my take was, can one really have liberty if you're hungry? And back then, that was the slogan of the president of the time that said, hunger zero in Brazil. So I created this piece, and the printed parts the matrices were made with rice and beans. And that was my take on it.
So Doris, tell me about this Moon series. What's up with this?
Well, this was actually an award that I got from the Brandywine Workshop in Archives, where I was to create an offset print. And it was a residency. I was there supposedly to be there for 3 months, and I ended up staying 6 months. With that, I started creating, this whole series it started with a blue moon that happened in July. And from there, I got geared up. And the more I would do and elaborate and create and recreate, I ended up with all this. And it's really just interpretations of the moon. I have the carnival moon, I have an earth moon, I have the blue moon. It was just something that, to me, it still talks about women, it talks about cycles, it talks about life, because of the cycles of the year. The moon has so much power over us, and that, to me, has been always a fascination.
Maybe that's why these are some of my favorites in this show.
I'm glad you like them.
I love them.
So we are talking about the moons and that it's inspires and has so much to do with our lives and all that. But then when you think of it, Patti, there are also interruptions, which is the case of COVID. It put like a stop in everybody's lives, including, we artists were very blessed because what we did, you cooped up in your studio, and that's when all this started to happen. I decided that I would continue working, and to me it was a wonderful way to just let everything out, And for this series, I decided that I would only work with recyclables and repurposed materials that I had and I found in the studio. And it started with little pieces they are 12 by 12, little pieces of masonite boards. And then I also made the decision to work with mostly collages, So everything I printed some things, and I would print like this one. There were prints, but then I cut them up. I used, Japanese silkscreen papers, or in this case, again, it was a print that I cut up. And that's how this whole little series, came about. And then with the help and enthusiasm from another dear friend of ours who is a glass artist, I always did mosaics, mostly as community projects, making tiles and pressing tiles and all that. But she talked me into doing, why not glass mosaic? And was also, a series that came about during the pandemic, and we would take a look at it. Okay. Here, Patti, these are the ones, it was also, a product of COVID. I was really, like I said, our friend, friend, it's the one that really talked me into, why not do, mosaic, glass mosaics. To me, they became in the beginning of the process almost like art therapy. If you remember, we were at the studio with masks on. There was only the three of us working from a distance and from each other and all that. And all this stuff really kept me going. It was wonderful, and it got to the point that I'll show you my last series over there, which was in the fall of 21, that I decided to revisit old woodcuts, and create, something that it had to be happy. To me, I took a different look. And then I really ended up, like at the end of COVID, not that it ended already, but in 21, when I decided to just take, the earlier woodcuts and give them life again. But this time, although I was going to be talking about the Amazon, these are all pods and seeds from the Amazon. This series is Amazon's Genesis. But I really needed, because of the situation, be positive about it. So I thought if I give bright, happy colors, it would make me happier. But I still had to talk a little bit about the brown lines as a metaphor for the illegal logging that goes on. I just couldn't let that go. I needed to, insert that on my story. Well, and this is my final piece because it's actually my most recent piece, and it's really in response to the situation of the political situation of women in our country now. So I created these banners on, they are monoprints on Chinese rice paper, and it really shows, the idea of a clothesline which shows, what it's expected, from women, hanging clothes and doing the work and all that. So it's very delicate. But at the same time, I had the rocks, on the bottom as a metaphor for what we really are. We are the rocks. Mm-hmm. And the title, of course, it's Ex Chromo Force. So that speaks for itself.
Mm-hmm. Well, Doris, I love this piece when I just looked at it, but I love it even more now knowing the story behind it. And I just want to say this exhibit has been really a pleasure to walk through, and I hope you continue to make art for years to come.
And I'm really so happy that I could share so much of who I am with all of you. Thank you.